The scary stories will start in 40 seconds. Before they do, I just want to remind you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. I am committed to making your experience here the best it can be, which is why there are only 2 mid-roll ads in this video. There's one after the first story and one after the second. That's it. I want you to enjoy the rest of the video with no interruptions. So again, if you enjoy my videos and want to show your support to this channel, then please subscribe and hit the thumbs up. It helps me more than you know. Now, let's begin. This happened nearly 5 years ago now, but unfortunately, the memory remains very ingrained in my mind. It was a Sunday night, and I had gone to bed early because tomorrow was going to be my first day back at work in almost a month. At some point in the night, I began to stir as I realized the soft laughter I was hearing in my dreams was actually a physical, real-life laugh. It was very faint, childlike almost, a giggle. Sitting up in my dreary state, I assumed my brother had left the television on in the lounge. So, dragging myself out of bed, I staggered down the hallway to switch it off. However, as I approached the living room, I soon realized that the laughter isn't increasing in volume, and upon reaching the room, I confirmed that indeed, there is no TV or radio producing any sound. Feeling a bit foolish, I make my way back towards my room, where I hear no further giggling. Passing it off as my sleep-deprived brain playing tricks on me, I get back into bed and soon fall asleep. An hour later, I was again stirred awake. This time, by the soft plucking of my steel string guitar, which I keep in my office at the other end of the hall. No discernible melody, just random touches. Feeling very frustrated at this point for being woken twice in one night, I immediately fling myself out of bed, determined to find the source of these irritating noises. Before I even make it 2 steps toward the door, the noise comes to an abrupt halt, and I realize that it too was coming from my room. More perplexed than angry at this point, I whirl around to see what could possibly be producing this noise, and all at once, I feel like the wind has been knocked out of me. Sitting in the corner of my room, crossed-legged in a puddle of wet carpet, is a large, shaggy man, wearing soaked clothes and holding my guitar. A million simultaneous thoughts go through my mind at this instant. All logical thought seemed to come to a complete standstill at that point. And for whatever reason, some deep-seated social cue came roaring to life, and my mouth sputtered out the words, "Would you like a cup of tea?" Because, obviously the first thing you do when someone comes to your house is offer them a cup of tea, right? The man seems pleased with this interaction. He perks up and nods brightly. Finally, the rational part of my brain awakens from its coma, and I turn and sprint from the room, slamming it shut behind me. I scream for my brother to call the police, while holding on to the door handle with all my might, dreading the desperate struggle that was sure to happen. "There's a man in my room!" He comes running, and once he sees the look of terror on my face, does not waste time in making the call. While listening to him give the operator our address and pleading with them to hurry, I hear a soft knock knock on the other side of the door. "No sugar, please." The word bamboozled comes to mind when I think about this moment. I fully expected to reach down, pinch my arm, and awaken from the most vivid dream of my life. The police arrived not long after, and my brother led them to me and the end of the hall, my knuckles turning white on the doorknob. After mentally bracing myself, I let go of the handle and leapt backwards, letting the policemen do their thing. They rushed into the room, tasers drawn, shouting at this home invader to show himself. Their aggression was short-lived, however, and I was still close enough to see why. The man was simply sitting on the edge of my bed now, amusing himself by playing with one of my figurines. I think the officers were also taken back by this, as they halted for a second, before continuing, just a touch more gingerly. To cut a rather long-winded story short, and to confirm what you probably have already deduced, yes, this man was a mental patient who had slipped out of his temporary hospice and waded along the river, looking for houses to explore. Muddy footprints on my neighbors' decks confirmed that he had originally tried to enter their homes. I was simply the one foolish enough to leave mine unlocked. The police took him away, and they later gave me a follow-up call to say that he had been put in a much more secure location, but that I should still be a lot more vigilant when it comes to securing my house. In hindsight, I believe this man was totally harmless. Mentally ill, yes, obviously, but not malicious. There was ample opportunity when he could have harmed me, had this been his intent, but he did not do so. He simply took my unlocked door as an invitation to come in. I did not press charges, as I did not want to damage the life of an already damaged person. The incident left me pretty shaken up, excuse the earthquake pun, for quite some time, and I still struggle falling asleep sometimes. But for the most part, I have moved on. There is one thing that I have not been able to let go of, however. I believe this one detail has left a permanent scar on my psyche. As the police were leading the man from my house, he uttered a short giggle, the same one I had heard when I was awoken originally, and then he said, "He couldn't find me under his bed." This happened a few years ago in my old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days. Like I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I put back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor. Stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat. Or so I thought. One night, I woke up at around 1 o'clock in the morning, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, was sure I awoke from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower, so I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never close it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it, and a look at my phone confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see a reflection in my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. I'm still kind of impressed of that quick thinking. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way up, and a few seconds later, steam was rising, and the water hurt my feet flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman. She screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it close behind me. A little later, she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife, just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw that the knife was missing, and realized there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been the former person living in the flat, and was evicted after not paying rent. It seems she made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work, and sometimes at night. It's possible that what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about it. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed when I move into a new place. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in a town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. I, on the other hand, work from home. In late January of this year, we had gotten in a pretty big fight about something stupid. I can't even remember what it was about now, but it was one of those fights where we didn't speak to each other, text, call, or anything the whole next day. So this afternoon I was lying in bed getting work done. It was a Tuesday, and I was pretty sure his last class finished at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays, meaning he would surely be home at 2:30. But around 1 p.m., I heard the front door open and shut. I thought, I guess he's home an hour early today. It was normal for him to skip his last class every once in a while, so I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight, "Hey, how's it going?" conversation. So I continued to lie in bed and do my work, and wait for him to come in and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed, and I had earplugs sort of half in, as I usually do when I'm working, but I could hear the heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment, as he always does. If we hadn't been mid-fight, and I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of it all, I might have noticed. It was strange how slow the footsteps were, or how long he spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight, and didn't think about it. I was just lying there, waiting for him to finally come in. Finally, the bedroom door slowly opened, just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door, and prepared to give him a sort of awkward, "We've been fighting for 24 hours, huh?" smile. But the door didn't open more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with red nail polish on the doorknob. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they had opened it, without entering the room. I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs, and sort of froze there for a few seconds while thinking rapidly. My first thought, that was not my boyfriend. Then I thought, could that have been his mom? His sister? The landlady? For some reason I concluded that surely it was his mom or sister. So I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of women's perfume. Then I came to my senses and realized his mom and sister don't have keys and have never come over before. The landlady has never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There is a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood on the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up, and I asked him if his mom or sister might have come over unannounced. He told me, "No, don't move. I'm calling the police." The police were there in minutes and searched the whole apartment. Of course, nobody was there by this point. It was weird, though. Nothing was missing from the apartment, despite us keeping a jar full of money right in the entrance. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight to the bedroom, saw my legs on the bed, panicked, and left. Plus, you can't open that big wooden front door without a key. For a few days, my boyfriend and I were convinced it was just the landlady being nosy. I began to feel better. Nevertheless, we demanded that the landlady change our locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said surely someone used tools to break into the apartment. Then, a day or two later, my boyfriend told me, I have to tell you something, but don't freak out. He told me that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. I obviously freaked out. I tore the apartment apart, looking for those scissors. It's been 6 months, and those scissors are gone. So the whole thing is just creepy and weird. A stranger breaks into a nice apartment, but doesn't touch or take anything valuable. Not even the money jar sitting right in the entrance. Takes scissors from the kitchen, goes straight to the bedroom, sees someone in bed, and immediately leaves. I never got to meet the person who opened the door that day. I hope I never do. I was 12, and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up, and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there, with a clipboard, and he said that he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so I just told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt, with bold stripes, like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were, and walked into the open door of my room. The typical girly room with pink and glitter. Thankfully, my sister came down the stairs at almost that exact moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here, and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait. If Daphne isn't here, then who is that? I said, "He's here to read the gas meters." Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. It was the 60s, and obviously we weren't going back into the house to call authorities on the landline phone. Then, my ever-resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house, and she motioned him over. She called loudly into the house. "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meter upstairs." And just like she had hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was very nice. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because my parents left her in charge, and she worried that she would be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone, and authorities found the door open, and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down we knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out, we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad that we were okay, though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and say that she had been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man, but fear not, he was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s, so in any case, he has to be dead by now. I'm just so thankful every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action. It was Christmas time. My wife and I were staying at her childhood home, where her mother now lived all alone. The house was on a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs. If you're picturing freshly mowed lawns, American flags, and empty sidewalks, you're picturing it right. It's a single-story home with an attached garage out front. The garage has 2 doorways, apart from the electric garage door, of course. One leads to the garden and the backyard. This had an old doggy door from their days with dear old Max that they covered with a piece of nailed-in wood. That had always made me slightly uncomfortable before, but I figured it had been that way for years, so what's the worst that could happen? The second door leads to the kitchen. Hollow core. It could stop a mouse, but not much else. Definitely not something that wanted in, or someone. We were asleep in my wife's childhood bedroom at the front of the house. 3 a.m. I was in that deep, dark recess of sleep. You know, you're in the diving bell, and you're submerged, hundreds of meters below the surface in black water, protected from the real world by miles of nothingness. Then I heard it. The scream. "What are you doing?" It was my mother-in-law's voice echoing down the hallway. To me, lost in a sea of sleep, it sounded like a jet engine roaring past my eardrum. I bolted up. What happened next happened in a matter of seconds, but about that scream, even though I was dead asleep, I heard enough of it to sense an urgency behind it. This wasn't an, "Oh, you scared me" type of scream. This was different, and I knew it. Not consciously, but my lizard brain, that piece we retained from our primitive ancestors, knew something was wrong. I watch and read a fair amount of true crime, and this scream awakened that horrible fear, the one that says, this can't really be happening to me, can it? Honestly, in that second of the night, it sounded like someone was about to be murdered. You ever wonder if you're a fight or flight type of individual? I always have, and I came to know something about myself after this night. I'm a fighter. I leapt out of bed, growled, yes, growled, in the manliest voice I could muster, "I'm gonna kill you," and took off running. I tore open the bedroom door and ran into the hallway. There, at the end, I saw my mother-in-law, nightgown on, look of utter shock on her face, standing still. We make eye contact as I continue toward her. Then she turns her head, looks directly into the kitchen. I hurry past her and round the corner into the kitchen. The hollow core door is obliterated. Shards everywhere. I look through the open frame and see the electric garage door is open. I push ahead. As I run into the garage, I hear it. The sound of someone hopping into a running car just out of view. Just as I make it into the driveway, I see a car peeling out from the sidewalk adjacent to the house. But the adrenaline is still pumping. And who am I to say no to adrenaline? So, like an idiot, I run barefoot after the car. I give a good go, but I'm no Michael Johnson, and even he couldn't catch a speeding car. It soon vanishes down the street, and I'm left all alone. The police showed up within 3 minutes, which, I have to say, makes me feel a lot more at ease with my mother-in-law living there. They took our statements. My mother-in-law said she heard a noise, the hollow core door being kicked in, and walked into the kitchen, where she encountered the burglar, a small-framed woman. The police theorized she was working as part of a team. Her job was to squeeze through the doggy door, kick in the hollow core, and open the electric garage door for her accomplice. According to the police, the burglars most likely thought nobody was home. Fortunately, my mother-in-law must have caught her off guard and scared her, in addition to my manly growl, of course. But it feels good to know that everyone was safe, and to learn that I guess I've got a little fight in me. And for the record, we bought the heaviest wooden door you have ever seen to replace that hollow core. I'd like to see a mouse try and get through that. The location, Underwood, Washington. I was 14. I grew up deep in the woods and far from city limits. My school was roughly 15 miles away through back roads and endless trees and consisted of just 300 students, so I didn't have many options for friends, especially because everyone lived so spread out among the area. With the exception of my childhood best friend, Zach. Now, Zach and I go way back beyond just the age of 14. We basically grew up together in these woods, made our money bucking hay and chopping firewood for my grandpa to pay for things like our first trucks and our first hunting rifles together. We were true country boys at heart and loved the outdoors. There was one particular area that we spent the most time at because it was so far from anyone or anything that could bother us. It was a river a few miles away from my house down an old logging road that was blocked off by a locked gate. I won't name this river a road because I don't want anyone to put themselves in any danger if they were to hear this story and live close to the area I am describing. Anyways, this logging road from start to end was roughly 3 miles long, with big tall pine trees to your left and right. These trees block much of the sun, even on the brightest days. On the right side of the road was a steep ledge of rocks and bushes that would eventually end at the river that we were heading to. Now that you have an idea of our surroundings, allow me to get to the most sickening and scariest encounter I have had in my entire life. It was around 7 p.m., about an hour or so to sunset on a summer day. Zach and I began our walk down the logging road to hang out at our favorite spot along the river. As we reach the end of the road and take a game trail that animals have made to the river, we could hear a voice coming from close by, off in the distance, but it was from above us at the same time. We were basically at the river at this point, and the only place above us where a voice could be coming from was an old burned-down bridge that was only a skeleton of the steel that once held the rest of it together. This bridge had been taped off with red danger signs and barricades to keep trespassers off of it, and for good reason. This bridge was about 150 feet above the shallow rapids rushing underneath where Zach and I stood. As we both lifted our heads in response to the voice that we could hear, we saw a young boy, not much older than us, standing on the ledge of the bridge, dressed in black clothing. This immediately startled Zach and I, as we have never seen someone here even once in the years that we have visited this riverbed. We called out to him, and his head snapped down, and we met eyes, but no verbal response followed. "Hey, get down from there," Zach yelled. The boy snapped his emotionless face and eye contact over to Zach. Zach became uneasy, as did I at this point. Just before we could get another word in, out came this blood-curdling, high-pitched scream, louder than any I have heard before. This immediately scared us into running back up the trail and back up the logging road as fast as we could. We both were pale in the face and out of breath from running at about the halfway point, so we stopped assuming that we were safe. Just when we thought we were alone, we see a car rounding the corner down the road towards us. It was a police cruiser. At this point, it was almost completely dark. The cruiser slowly rolls up next to us, and he rolls down his window. "What are you boys doing here so late? You know nobody's allowed on this road. Didn't you read the signs on the gate?" We're sorry, officer. We're leaving right now." Stuttering through the entire sentence. "Have you boys seen a boy dressed in black down here?" He questioned us, so we told him everything, and without a second after our explanation, he takes off full speed down the trail, lights on and everything. Zach and I headed home, not speaking a word of what happened to our parents. Weeks pass, and we come up with the idea of going back, as we can't just give up on our favorite spot. Besides, it's been weeks, and nobody will be there. So we both, in agreement, begin the hike down to our spot, foolishly at sunset again, but to go night fishing along the bank. We get there with no problems. The sun has set, and we are fishing along the bank with our headlamps we brought so we could see. What happens next is about as scary as it gets. It's now completely dark, aside from our small lights. A loud and deafening scream breaks the silence along the river, followed by a thud and splash into the rocks and water in front of us. Zach and I have never ran home so fast before in our lives. We both knew what it was and exactly what had happened. Or so we thought. On the news the next morning, there was a covering of a story about a boy that had committed suicide by jumping off of that very bridge. We could only assume it was the scream and splash we heard from the night before, except the news wasn't talking about it happening last night. The news was reporting it had happened weeks ago on that very same day that we saw the boy and the officer. The boy had killed himself the first day that we saw him there, atop the bridge, just moments after we ran into the officer on the road. So who screamed, and what splashed into the water below while we were fishing in the dark last night? I will never know, and I will never return to find out. I live on the second floor of a 3-level apartment. We have a crawl space that connects all 3 apartments. We aren't sure why it's there, but we all have stuff in it, and none of us would ever even attempt to go inside of it, so we still felt pretty safe. The other night, the sun was setting, but it wasn't pitch black out or anything yet. I'm walking through my living room when I see a short woman on the fire escape looking in through my windows. This is extremely bizarre, considering it's still semi-light out, and she somehow had to literally climb up our fire escape. We have 2 windows that the fire escape reaches, and she was looking in both, but didn't see me. I crawled onto the ground, and my heart was racing as I watched her try to open the windows. I didn't know what to do because my phone was in the other room. After what seemed like an eternity, she finally left. I went into my room to get my phone to text my landlord and call the cops. I came back into the living room and was looking out the windows to see if I could locate her, when all of a sudden, I hear a weird noise coming from the ceiling. We have one of those T-bar tile ceilings made out of separate slabs of cork and wood. I look up to see one of the slabs has been moved, and 2 eyes staring at me. I have no clue how she got into the crawl space so quickly, but I grabbed the nearest thing next to me, which was a broom, and started hitting her with it through the ceiling, and called the cops as soon as she crawled away. They showed up and searched the place and didn't find her until a few days later, when she was on someone else's fire escape. The cops said she was definitely on some hard drugs and that she was violent towards them. I'm glad she's gone. I'm not sure I want to know why exactly she was trying to get into my apartment, or what she would have done if she had succeeded. Several years ago, I was in a bit of a financial pickle. I was 21, with a bad job history, a bad job, and bad credit. My living situation went sideways, and I had temporarily moved back home with my folks. As anyone who has ever had to move back home as an adult will tell you, this was a terrible, horrible situation, and I was in a rush to get back out on my own, which is why when my best friend told me that an apartment had opened up at her shady complex, I actually jumped at it. If you're from around here, then you'll know that every apartment complex in the town is kind of shady, but for those of you not from here, this place is a shady non-town outside of another non-town with more liquor stores than any other establishment, and several apartment complexes with no credit checks and same-day move-ins. A couple months went by, and while the cops did occasionally show up in our parking lot, and you had to watch your step for more than one broken bottle, it wasn't the worst place to live. I worked the night shift at a large retailer, shuffling around freight in the back, hating every minute of every shift. So one night, while I trudged up and down a ladder like a zombie at work, my cell phone fell out of my back pocket at the top of the ladder. I grabbed at it, obviously missing, and died a little as I saw it smack the ground and go black. No amount of restarting or shaking could fix it. The LCD was completely shot. I decided this was a good enough reason to go home mid-shift. Remember that thing I said about bad job history? Yeah, you can clearly see why. Driving home at 3 a.m. on some random weekday, I turned onto the dark back road that led to my apartment building. I saw something faintly up ahead, in the road, and immediately think it's someone's dog. I pulled up slower, praying that I wasn't coming up on someone's dead pet, and saw that there was actually a teenage boy laying in the side of the road waving. There was a bike laying in the dirt next to him. Holy crap! The kid saw me and jumped up, weaving towards the driver's side of my car. Now, I may have made a lot of poor decisions at this point in my life, but thankfully, I hadn't gone completely brain dead. I suddenly thought of all the warnings to young women about how serial killers and rapists would lure girls in by playing by their kind hearts. I locked the car doors, but cracked the driver's side window. "Are you okay? What happened?" "I got hit by a car, and they left me. I need help." The kid looked dazed and was scuffed up, but something about him also set my nerves on edge. "I'm going to call for help, okay?" I grabbed at my cell phone and then remembered that it was basically useless due to its ladder plunge. "My cell phone is broke, but I live nearby here, okay? I will get help." I hoped that he didn't think I was lying, but then I didn't care. The kid slammed his hand against my car. "Just let me in. I need help now." "I promise I will get help and I'll come back. Everything will be okay." I felt torn. I wasn't going to let this kid into my car, but at the same time, I couldn't blame him. If I was scared and hurt, I would probably be frantic too. The kid slammed his hand against the car again, and I started driving. I hadn't been exaggerating. It was a 30-second drive to my apartment. I didn't have a landline, and I didn't want to somehow lead this kid to my empty apartment with no way of calling for help. I saw my best friend's boyfriend's car parked in her spot, and immediately was thankful for the stroke of luck. I ran up the steps to her apartment and began banging on the door. Roy answered the door, probably expecting a crazy person, and was immediately even more alarmed to see me. "What's going on? Why aren't you at work?" I breathlessly explained that some kid had been hit by a car off the back road, but my cell wasn't working, and that I needed him to come back with me. Melanie, my best friend, emerged from her room, sleepy and equally confused. Roy immediately took charge, told us both to get in the car, and drove us back to the boy. The kid was still there, waving us down. Roy, a large man, Mel, and myself all got out of the car. "Help! I need help." "I'm here to help. My friend saw you and came and got me, okay? Calm down." "I got jumped by this gang, man. They beat me up and they stole my backpack and rode off," the kid said frantically. I immediately became alarmed. That's not what he told me at all. I looked at Mel, my face clouding over. I thought you got hit by a car. Why did the gang jump you? What? Oh, yeah. They beat me up and then someone hit me with a car. Plausible. I was still confused, though. Roy also seemed weary of this change in the story. Listen, man. Let me call an ambulance, okay? Can you tell me your name? The kid lost it. He screwed his face up and clenched his fists, hitting the side of his head. No. Just let me in the car, man. Just take me to your house. Roy was done. That is not happening, kid. I'll call an ambulance and the police, and I can wait with you until they get here, but we can't bring you back with us. The kid slapped the side of his head some more, and then in the most disturbing thing I've ever seen, grabbed fistfuls of his shaggy hair and began pulling it out of his scalp. That sound is still the most disgusting and alarming thing I've ever heard. Roy gave Mel and I the let's get out of here face, and we jumped back in the car. I'm calling the police, okay? I will tell them that you've been hurt and you need an ambulance. Roy began dialing, and the kid began stomping around and screaming. Take me to your house, just let me get in the car. Why won't you take me home? The kid stood in the street, blood trickling from where he had torn up his scalp. Roy got back in the driver's seat and spoke with the cops as the kid raged outside. He then came to the window, staring so intently at us that I felt like my skin had shriveled up and fallen off. He began kicking the tires, and Roy, clearly over it, drove off, the kid grabbing frantically at the back of the car. Roy drove past our turn, around Peters Creek twice, to avoid leading the kid to the apartment complex, and then back down our road. The kid was gone. The bike, the kid, just gone. No idea where he took off to. Clumps of his hair were still in the road. We never saw the kid again. We searched the papers and the internet to see if he had been picked up, or if any other strange things had taken place that night, but nothing else ever showed up. What confuses me still about it all is why he would demand to come back with all three of us. One person could obviously be easily overtaken, but what were his plans for all three of us? I have never told a soul about this, and it's upsetting me telling it now, but I reckon it will do me good to get it told. 30 years ago, I was 20 then, lived on the top floor of a large house split into 5 flats. One night, back home alone after clubbing and drinking way too much alcohol, there was a knock at my door. I didn't hesitate in opening it, despite it being 3 a.m., for several reasons. The main front of the house locked with 2 keys, so it was obviously someone who lived there. I was good friends with the other tenants, so it was clearly someone that needed me urgently. I had been clubbing with 2 of the others who lived downstairs, and I had only been home for 10 minutes, so it was likely one of them. I opened the door to a stranger. He was normal looking and very apologetic. I'm really sorry, but the guy that lives downstairs is my brother, and I'm back before him. Can I wait here for him, please? I'm sure he won't be long. We left the club at the same time. Then he had stepped forward. In hindsight, so that I couldn't close the door on him, but I didn't process this at the time. It's fine. I've woken you. I'll go wait outside. I have since read The Gift of Fear, but back then, I was a friendly, naive young woman who wanted to help my neighbor's brother, so I let him inside. He sat on the couch, and I sat away from him on the chair. The distance was good. He was a stranger. I asked if he was staying with his brother, and he replied that he was visiting him for a week. I felt okay. I was about to offer him a cup of tea when something changed. I can't exactly say what it was. but I did not feel safe. He looked straight at me. Into my soul, it felt. The pause was uncomfortably long, but I couldn't speak. "You don't want to know what I'm thinking," he said with a slight smile. I felt sick. Time froze. I will go downstairs and knock on your brother's door for you. See if he's home yet." And I stood up, trying to calm myself. Somehow, he was now standing between me and my front door. Just then, the timing perfect, I heard my friend in the flat below, rattling her keys in her front door. "Hey!" I yelled as loudly as I could. "Come on up for a drink." He looked furious, and time sped up as he passed my friend at my door, and he took the stairs 2 at a time. My friend came inside, and I slammed and locked the door, bursting into tears. Long story short, you've guessed it, the guy downstairs didn't have a brother. I have no idea how he got in the front door. The kicker came later, when I found out a girl was raped the same evening, 2 streets away. And no, I didn't report him. I felt stupid. I was drunk. I was incredibly lucky. My friends and I decided to go camping one spring break. We had planned a week in advance, and as the day got closer, the weather got worse. It was cold and gray, unheard of for Arkansas. The night finally came along with yet another cold front. It was in the 30s, but we had dressed warm and stocked up on whiskey and beer. The plan was to hit a spot my buddy knew, which was barely accessible with his 4x4. We wanted to really camp, none of those designated sites for families and seniors in RVs, so we aimed away from civilization, which was only made up by a single stoplight and a couple hundred people, and drove into the woods. After 30 minutes of bone-rattling dips across dry creek beds and detours around trees, it started to rain. By the time we found camp, it had turned into hail. The spot was marked by an ancient dirt road, a few hundred feet long, and the rotting carcass of a VW bug. That night was spent passing a bottle around, hoping that we would figure out the tents before we were too drunk. Eventually we did, and managed to start a fire with diesel. At this point, the hail had stopped. The empty whiskey bottle lay broken in the fire, and we had a decent pile of empties growing. We drank, we played cards, and we passed out in our tents. The next morning, I gradually regained consciousness to the sound of something large being dragged past my tent. It was what looked to have once been a station wagon, stripped and rust-covered, dragging the VW with a chain. The VW had been there for so long that the floor had rotted out, and roots had tied it to the forest floor. They laid scattered in the wake of the wagon. A woman was driving, a man beside her, and 3 shirtless kids sat in the back where there used to be seats. The man stared out the window away from us the entire time. The children had dirt smeared on their faces, which illuminated their glassy 1,000-yard stares. It's the look of crushing poverty, and you've probably only seen it in pictures. It exists in war-torn countries, the projects in inner cities and the deep south. So deep that the old gas station back in town, a place you would probably jokingly hum the Deliverance theme, that was the city to these people. She spoke in a deep, nicotine and whiskey-soaked drawl. "Y'all come from the city to do some camping? Well, reckon that's fine, long as you ain't doing no drugs. Y'all ain't doing no drugs, are ya?" We weren't. "Just drinking then? Hell, I like a drink now and again, my darn self, that's fine, just fine. Want to know how I knowed y'all was here? Seen them black helicopters flying around. Them same boys that work for me, see? This my land. And they told me, can't be too careful. Figured I'd best check it on out. She started laughing. Mucus bubbled up to wet her dry cackle. The man stared out at nothing. One of the children put both hands on the window and gazed through us. His mouth hung open, and spit cut a line through the filth of the glass. He was probably 10 years old. Y'all know Bethany? We didn't. Ha! Everyone knows old Beth. Y'all go to church? I lied. Good. Ain't got time for those that don't fear God. Why don't you come on to church tomorrow? You can meet Bethany. It's just over that hill up there. You can't miss it. Boy, she'd sure like to meet y'all. They all would. We assured her that we would. She drove away into the trees, slowly dragging the VW. As soon as she left, we all looked at each other and started laughing. It was just nerves. There wasn't anything funny about it. We all have the remnants of a primitive warning system for danger. It's been eroded by living safe and civilized. But every once in a while, it goes off, and you obey it without question. Something is wrong. It started before she spoke. When I looked into her eyes, something is wrong. The kids, the man, her laugh. Something is wrong. Eventually we did hike up the hill. You could see for a mile. There was nothing. No buildings. No clearings. Just forest. We cut our trip short, packed up, and left before noon. We never went back. During my time in high school, things were rough, especially considering it was an all-boys school. Teachers were strict, physical punishment wasn't uncommon, and fights can get really physical. One kid I basically grew up with for 3 years in that school was named JB. Now we weren't friends, but we spoke occasionally and had mutual friends. He always seemed not all there, and had the weirdest conversations with himself that made no sense. Always creeped me out, but I never expressed my opinion to anyone. The day he got expelled was one of the wildest days ever to take place in that school. I wasn't there to see it, but I did see the aftermath of the fight when walking with a friend. I never got the full story, and everyone I spoke to about it had a different version. Since I saw the damage, I can say 3 possible stories were true. Either the fight was unprovoked and JB cut a guy deep with some sharp scissors, or JB started having a mental breakdown and then cut the guy with scissors, or JB and the guy were arguing and they started fighting, and that's when JB cut him. JB was expelled. The police were called, but he apparently ran off school property. Fast forward to 2016. I'm working for a family friend part-time until university starts up. The boss and I strike up a conversation, and he mentions the recent murders. I didn't know much, but apparently someone was going around, caving people's heads in with a cinder block. The killer had 4 victims, an elderly woman, plus her son, and 2 other males. After work was done, my dad came over to pick up a few things from the shop. Lucky for me, I didn't have to walk home that day. I told him about the murders and he said, "Yeah, I've heard about them. You know it's a former student from your school, right?" Not sure why my boss didn't tell me that part of the story, but oh well. I called up a friend from high school and asked if he knew who it was. Not sure why I was surprised when he said it was JB. The kid was crazy. He should have been my first guess, but nope. He was caught when locals found him trying to kill another woman, and they beat him half to death. That's the full extent of the story I know. Still kind of weird knowing someone you saw every day for 3 years ended up becoming a serial killer. When I was a lot younger, around my early teens, I had a pen pal who I would exchange emails with. Her name was Natsume, and she lived in Japan. I found out she would be visiting America around summer vacation as part of a club activity or something along those lines. My mother, who worked for a travel company at the time, was able to get a little miniature trip pulled together for us to Boston, where Natsume would be staying. I was excited about meeting my pen pal in person. It's something I looked forward to greatly. I spent the better part of 2 months wondering what she would be like in person, if she spoke good enough English for us to understand each other, etc. Well, it turned out to all be for nothing. After several days in Boston, we were unable to get together, except for a very brief moment the night before I was going home. She had been on tours and all that sort of stuff with her club, so we didn't get a chance to meet up due to all those structured activities. My mother, as you can imagine, was not pleased. That trip was not terribly expensive, but it wasn't like we were traveling for free. We went to where Natsume was staying, had the trip advisor bring her downstairs, and my mom went off on her. I can definitely understand her reasoning. Meeting her was the entire point of this trip. So, long story short, that was the end of my pen pal correspondence with Miss Natsume. Now, here's where things get strange. On that same night, I went for a little stroll outside the hotel. There was a Wendy's I could see was open from the hotel room. My mom was asleep, and I had $5 burning a hole in my pocket. Plus, I wanted to smoke outside where it was nice and cool. I stepped outside through one of the fire doors of the hotel. I light up a cigarette, and a guy, in his late 20s, I'm guessing, approached me. He asked me what I was doing. I said I was going to the Wendy's. His exact response was, "I'm pretty sure your mother told you not to walk over there without her." Which she had. I didn't really piece together the weirdness of that until later, so I just lied and said she gave me the okay. I started walking, and he walked alongside me, puffing on a cigarette of his own. He asked me if I ever got to see my pen pal, and I told him I hadn't. "Sorry, kid," he told me, "but if she came here with people from her school, there was no way they'd let her run around Boston with you and your mom. She should have known better." I quickly realized that this man I had never met before knew things that there was no way he could have known about me. For starters, this was back at a time when there was no Wi-Fi everywhere. You had to plug your internet into the wall at the hotel. So it's not like I'd been on the internet announcing my plans. We didn't own a laptop. We didn't even use the hotel phone the entire time we were there. Who was this guy? And how does he know so much about me? Asking seemed like a really bad idea, so I didn't. He walked me all the way over to the Wendy's. "Hurry up and get your food, kid," he told me. "I won't tell if you won't. Just make it quick, it's late." Well, I got my food. The creepy man stood outside the restaurant while I ate. Then, when I came out, he escorted me back to the hotel. We talked a little bit about video games as we walked. Sonic Adventure 2 specifically, because I had been playing it religiously before coming on this trip. Before we parted ways, the man told me, "If your mom asks, just lie and say you were in the exercise room, and throw your cup out before you go upstairs." I had been messing around in the exercise room every night at that hotel. This person, who I never met before, who I never saw again, knew so much about me that he could pass for my older brother. I still wonder about it to this day. What a strange trip.